Before we get into this, I want you to slow down for a moment, take a deep breath, and let this story soak into every fiber of your being. What you're about to hear isn't just a trip report, it's a raw, unfiltered account of love, addiction, loss, and survival. It begins in 1986 when a woman meets a man named Scotty at a local bar. At first, he seemed like just another regular, funny, kind, and a little rough around the edges. But as time went on, their lives became tangled in ways that neither of them could have predicted. Through love, drugs, children, heartbreak, and ultimately, tragedy. This is not an easy story to hear, but it's real, and maybe, just maybe, it can serve as a reminder of how fragile life is when addiction takes control. So let's start from the beginning. I met Scotty in 1986 at a bar where my roommate worked. He would always come in with his friend Steve, and the two of them would sit around, BSing and drinking Crown Royal shots. They were known as the Crown Royal Boys. Anyhow, they were both very nice, very polite, and just likable kind of guys. Sometimes Scotty would come in by himself, and he always looked so down. Later I found out why. It was because he was very, very lonely. One time he asked me out to dinner, with no strings attached as he put it, but I was in a relationship at the time, so I had to decline his kind offer. Later, one day in September of 1987, I was at the bar. Scotty was there too. I wasn't very happy in my relationship because of abuse. That night, I ended up going over to Scotty's house to drink and do crank. We partied, we talked, we drank. We talked about all kinds of things, including my unhappy relationship. He offered me a place to stay if I needed one. Again, no strings attached. We talked some more, and then finally he said he had to lay it down. He needed rest because he had to go to work in just a few hours. He welcomed me to stay, on the couch or in his bed. Again, no strings attached. I decided I would stay the night there. He offered me one of his t-shirts to sleep in. When I began undressing in front of him, he hid his face, pointed toward the bathroom and said, "You can go in there and change." I chuckled to myself and thought, what a country bumpkin. But his innocent-like ways were cute. Anyway, I ended up laying down in his bed, and a couple of months later I realized I was pregnant with his baby. Scotty and I began our life together. He was so happy to have me there with him. My daughter, who was 10 at the time, stayed with us for a bit too. And Scotty, he was just great with her. He seemed like such a great guy, and he really was, you know. But drugs had a hold on him, and on me too. At that time, I carried our daughter to term. In the first 3 months of pregnancy, I still partied, beer and a couple match heads of coke. Then I quit. I stayed clean and sober for the rest of my pregnancy. Of course, Scotty partied like usual. I gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. And then I fell back into the party thing all over again after she was born. But with a new baby, I couldn't run free like I used to. I got left at home, while Scotty would go to the bar and do his thing. Sometimes we went out together. Bars, parties, the scene. But later down the road, I'd get pregnant again and quit. He kept going. Throughout my pregnancy, he kept partying. I would lay awake at night, worrying. Where was he? Was he okay? Was he dead or alive? I called the bars, his friends, the hospital, jail, all of those things, hunting him down. And eventually, he would wander in drunk. Sometime in the morning, I cried, I yelled, I screamed. I tried to talk to him, reason with him, guilt trip him, you name it. I did it, trying to make him clean up his act. And he would feel bad. He'd say, I'm gonna clean up. But hey, we all know the scene. I got pregnant a second time, found out I was having a boy. I could hardly wait to tell Scotty. I rushed home, full of excitement, but on the way, I saw his truck sitting out in front of a friend's house. A friend and a dealer. I stopped. I went in, and there he was, pawning one of his carpenter saws for a quarter bag of crank. I was mad. I split. He came home shortly afterwards, head hung low, shame all over him. The usual speeches. I'm sorry. I've let you down again. I gave birth to our son. On the day I was being discharged from the hospital, after I had already checked out, I waited 2 hours for Scotty to come pick me and his new baby up. When he finally showed, he was so amped up, it was embarrassing, sweating, talking so fast. I was mad. I was hurt. How could he be late, picking me and his son up from the hospital? I yelled at him all the way home. He gave me some story about riding his motorcycle with a buddy who got pulled over, about how he had to ride off, hide out, keep an eye on things, about how the guy went to jail, and how Scotty went up to some chick at the gas station, asked her to help him get his friend's bike, and of course she helped him, because they knew each other from the bar. I always wondered how true that story was, especially later down the road, when we were at the bar together and I saw him in the corner arguing with her. It looked like a lover's quarrel to me. Anyhow, the night we got home with our son, Scotty took off to the bar because he was mad that I bitched him out. I just sat home and cried. Finally, I called the bar. He wasn't there, but I told the bartender, if she saw him, please tell him I was sorry. Tell him I loved him. Tell him I wanted him to come home. That was what our relationship was like. He would drink and use. I would yell and scream and accuse him of being on dope. He would lie. I would find his bag and bust him. Then he would get pissed and leave. Or he would feel guilty, apologize, and then the circle started all over again. This was the dance we did. He would leave. I would hunt him down by phone or with my car. We would fight. We would make love. We would make up. And then we would do it all over again. Eventually, I went out and bought my own quarter bag because I thought, screw it. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. But really, all I wanted was for Scotty to accept me. If that meant I had to use so he would like me again, then I would use, and I did. We continued to fight. He continued to run. I chased. And sometimes I did my own running. And when he chased, that was fun. It felt good, for once, to have him come after me. Eventually we moved out of our old neighborhood to a whole new city, hoping we could get away from the drugs. Scotty had lost jobs. He was taking whatever he could get. We hoped this move would bring us a new future, and for about a month, it did. Scotty stayed home with me. We were both clean. We laughed. We had fun. He was really great to be around. And then, I got pregnant. One day, Scotty left to look for work. I puttered around the house doing the Susie homemaker thing. It got later and later. No sign of Scotty. I started worrying about him, wondering, had he been in an accident? Calling hospitals, calling jails, calling some of the local bars. And then, that dread set in. Thoughts of him using again filled my mind. But I wouldn't let them take root. There was just no way he would do that, I told myself. Hours later, He wandered in with some story about running out of gas and some guy who was right on helping him out. Of course, the guy just happened to be a crank dealer, blah blah blah, blah blah blah. But I didn't get any dope, and I'm not gonna use, I promise, he said. Day after day, night after night, Scott's addiction took him further and further away. I wasn't sure. I wanted to have this baby and go through this again, but I just couldn't go through an abortion. So I was pregnant again, the third time, with Scotty's baby. Scott began hanging out at his new friend's house a lot. He'd become mean in his actions toward me. One day, he was outside, being a jerk. I was going to our door, just so I didn't have to listen to his mouth, spewing obscenities toward me. I shut the screen door and was about to close the glass door when, out of nowhere, Scotty thrust a knife through the screen, just barely stopping before making contact with my pregnant belly. I continued shutting the door, and he went around front, broke through the door, tearing it off the hinges. We constantly fought. I constantly felt, if only I was a better person, or if only I didn't do this, or if only I did that, then maybe he would love me and stop using. Once again, we decided to move. I must say, I was relieved to leave that place. I was all for moving. We were moving to the San Fernando Valley in LA County. We were going to stay with some friends for a bit, till we got on our feet. Scotty was mellow there, but he still did his thing. We got our own place and things remained the same for me, wondering where he was, what he was doing. He drank and did his dope, but seemed less out of control as before. I had a friend that lived in Oregon and would talk to her on a regular basis. We decided to move to Oregon and try and start a new life. My mom sent me some money to help us move. Things were fun on the way there until our car burnt to the ground. My friend had to come and get us. We stayed at her place and things were okay, but I was not happy there either. Scotty drank, but I didn't notice much crank use, but of course I was taking care of 3 babies now, all in diapers. I was focused on them. We ended up moving back to California a month later and staying at his brother's wife's house. His brother was in jail for what else? Drugs. Anyway, we stayed there, found a place to move to, and just like before, it all started over again. This time though, I went out drinking with Scotty, and when we came home, I was so drunk, I hugged the toilet all night. The next day I was thinking about things and realized that I didn't remember if I paid our babysitter or not. As a matter of fact, I don't even remember coming home. I thought to myself, what if I had dropped my baby? Would I have remembered to call 911? And that's when I knew things had to change, at least where I was concerned. Scotty remained true to his addictions and I was miserable. He would drink and come home drunk, yelling and screaming at me, calling me all kinds of names. I hated it. I thought to myself, if he calls me a freaking bitch one more time, I'm going to scream. I was so sick of my life and all the misery Scott's drinking and drugs was causing. I thought, I am so unhappy and have been unhappy for as long as I can remember. I thought, I am going to just kill myself. Yeah, that's it, I'll kill myself. I've tried drugs, I've tried alcohol, I've tried men, I've tried everything and nothing works. Now there is nothing left but death. Then something said, have you tried God yet? Until you've tried God, you haven't tried everything. I prayed right then and there. I said, God, I don't want to drink anymore. I don't want to use drugs anymore. I don't even want to smoke anymore. 3 days later, it occurred to me that I hadn't done any of my old habits, and I realized that not only had I not practiced any old habits, but I didn't even have the desire to. That was the beginning of the end of my drug days for the next 4 years. And at that moment, I thought to myself, there must be something to this God thing. I could never quit on my own before, but when I prayed, it worked for me. It was a true miracle. I began going to church. I wanted Scotty to come, but he preferred the bars and his dope. I took the kids and attended church. He hung out with his buddies and did drugs. I told him that we needed to live in separate places and that I wanted him to move. He wasn't happy with me, but he pretended like he would honor what I said and left to go work on his van so that when he moved out, he could leave me the car. Well, that day I got a phone call from Scott's friend. Scotty had propped his van up on one side, resting it on a couch, and the other side was jacked up. It was a windy day, and the wind blew. The propped up side dropped on Scott while he was under the van, and he was rushed to the hospital. Some friends from church came over and took my kids so that I could leave to be with Scott. I got to the hospital, and the doctors told me that they doubted that he would live, and if he lived, they said he would have brain damage. I went to see him, and he was hooked up to tubes and monitors and all sorts of things. He was in a coma, and later the nurses told me that didn't think he would make it through the night. Scotty had no broken bones, but had punctured a lung. The big worry was that he had been under the van for about 4 minutes with little to no oxygen. Well, time went by and Scotty came out of the coma but couldn't move his right arm. As time went on, he healed completely and was back to his old self before you knew it. I thought for sure he would have this new outlook on life since his life had been spared, but no. He didn't even remember the accident. I still had him move out, and he went to stay with his brother that had gotten out of prison again. I continued on in church, and he continued to worship his God, meth and alcohol. One day he came to me and said he wanted to be clean and sober and start going to church. We were married a few days later. I was so happy that he was clean and he did real good for a while, but he fell here and there. Before our first anniversary, he was already back into his dope world. I'd come home from church and there would be all these people out front, all druggies of course. While Scotty was clean and going to church, we had some really nice times. He could be so wonderful when he was clean. I loved him dearly. I kept thinking he would come to his senses and stop doing dope again. But no such luck. It got worse. I'd find evidence of his drug use and confront him, only to have him lie about it. Our first anniversary rolled around, and he was so proud to take me to Pismo Beach, rent me a Lexus. It was great, except he just wasn't present. He tried to be, but he couldn't fake it. I could tell he really wanted to make me happy and be clean, but if he did that, he wouldn't be happy. So from that point on, Scotty lived the way he wanted to. I left Scotty on November 14th, 1994. I hoped it would be a wake-up call for him, like a big smack in the head. But it wasn't. He spiraled down even further. I would see him from time to time, or have him over for dinner, though he usually didn't eat. I had a hard time letting him completely go. He would come to me every now and then and tell me he needed help, and I would try to help him. He went in and out of drug rehab Christian men's homes, but always returned to drugs. I tried to help him as much as I could, taking him to meetings, being supportive, but I got burnt out. The final straw was when he stayed with me under the condition that he would go to the VA for outpatient rehab. I drove him to the meetings, dropped him off, and didn't see him for a couple of days. He had taken his money and spent it on dope. That was it. I was done. Don't get me wrong, I let him visit his kids and me, but I kept my distance. He stayed with friends, and I would get phone calls from people saying he had ripped them off and that they had found needles around the place he was staying. I didn't believe them because I hadn't seen that side of Scotty. I knew in his past he had used needles, but I didn't think he did when he was with me. There were a time or two that he came to visit and fell asleep on my couch, and I thought there might have been needle marks on him, but I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to ask. I didn't want him to lie, and I didn't want to know. I watched a man go from a hard-working man to a man who couldn't hold a job. I watched a man who had a place to live begin to live under overpasses and down by lakes. One day, Scotty came to me and told me that he really wanted help. A friend of mine directed him to a place called the Lord's House. Scotty went and stayed there. For a while, he got a job at the church and did quite well for a fairly good amount of time. He would come and visit for the holidays. He really was trying, but the hope he now held for a relationship with me was gone. I had lost all trust. Scott moved out of the Lord's house, but stayed in the same California city. I ended up moving to Maryland. In 1998, Scotty called me up and said he wanted to come see his kids. I told him okay, but that he would have to stay in a motel because he couldn't stay with me. When he showed up, he had $5. To his name, I let him hang at my place for 2 nights, and then I took him to a place to talk to someone about rehab. I gave him $10 and dropped him off on the way to this place. He was trying to tell me how much he had changed. Changed, I yelled. You haven't changed. Here I sit in this van, driving you to another place so that you can go into rehab. You haven't changed at all. Scott, what has changed is me, and this is the last time that I am going to do this with you. I am not the same woman I was in California, and you are not going to put me through this ever again. So you better get it right this time. Scott got into a rehab but took off a few weeks later and went back to California. We would talk to him from time to time via telephone. He would always try to tell me he was doing good, but I knew he was lying. I moved back to Oregon in June of 2001, and I hunted Scott down via telephone so that he would at least know where his kids were. At that time, Scott was traveling around with some carnival, but he did say that he would like for me to look up jobs for him and to help him find a Salvation Army out here to stay at. But I didn't. I honestly didn't want him to move here. Unless he could have come out here with enough money to find a place to live and really look for work on his own, I would get letters from Scott apologizing to me and the kids. He would always let me know he wished we could get back together, and I know Scotty loved me as best as he knew how, but I couldn't put myself or our kids through his drug addiction. He later ended up in coastal California and has lived there the past 3 years. We talked a few times, and he sent the kids some money for their birthdays and Christmas. I don't know what he did for work there, but I do know that he used the homeless shelter as his address. He would write the kids, and our oldest daughter was going to school out in California. He would go and visit her. I saw his effort there. He told me he wanted to see our other kids and get to know them, but I was really scared to let him. I was afraid he would hurt them with his drug use. They had been hurt enough. I had always been honest with them about his drug use and never tried to cover it up. I figured it was better to know that Daddy was a drug addict, and that is what kept Daddy from being around rather than chance. Them thinking Daddy didn't love them, I talked to Scotty. About a year ago, I was distant. I had to be. I wasn't about to let him in ever again. Our older daughter told me that he had gone to see her in June of 2004, and he kept leaving and going to the bar he was hanging out with old friends. That use a mutual friend said that he was sweating and acting like a wild man, drinking one beer after another. He was with his brother, who had just got out of prison yet again for drugs. My daughter was upset with her dad because he was supposed to be helping her move to Colorado. He was to drive the U-Haul, but she didn't feel safe with him, acting like he was a friend, confronted him on his behavior, and he did the typical and was insulted. He said he resented being accused of being on drugs. He told them that they could figure out how to get to Colorado themselves and left. In November of 2004, I had tried to contact Scotty regarding the kids, but he did not answer his cell phone. I called and left. Message after message with nothing in return. That was very odd for Scott, because one thing he had been trying to do was call back if it was one of the kids or about one of them. On February 9th, 2005, I got a phone call from our oldest daughter that lives in Colorado. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello." She said, "Mom." I said, "Yes." She said, "Dad died." I will never forget those words. Scotty died on October 16th, 2004, due to complications from drug use. He had been shooting up, and as a result, he got a bacterial infection, cellulitis, which he probably thought was just an abscess. He more than likely tried to treat it himself, and when he realized that he couldn't and it was getting worse, he then went to the hospital, but he had waited too long because it had turned into staph plus necrotizing fasciitis. He lived for 7 days until his body went into septic shock and he had a cardiac arrest and died. I just found this out February 9th, 2005. Scotty had listed himself as single. Therefore, they didn't try to find his wife or his kids. He died being labeled a transient with no kin instead of celebrating his 48th birthday. Scott was being cremated. I spoke with the coroner and sheriff, and they told me that a man named John took Scott to the hospital, and after Scott passed away, John tried to say he was Scott's brother and claim his personal belongings when asked for ID. John then said, "Well, I was like a brother." What a vulture, the very people that paraded around, as his friends were the first to try and rip him off. I was angered by this to no end. You know, when we use, we think, what's the big deal? I'm not hurting no one. That is not the truth, because people are being hurt by your drug. Use everyone who loves you is being hurt by it. Just ask Scotty's kids. They've suffered the ultimate pain. Their dad is dead because of his choice to use. If you are reading this and you are using drugs, it doesn't matter what kind of drugs or how you use them. Please get help. There is hope for you. Remember this. As long as there is breath, there is hope. Do you or someone you love suffer from methamphetamine drug use? The drug is referred to by many names including METHSPEEDCRANKGOFASTZIPCRYSTASTACHER